stuff that
You've been talking to him for years. Like, yeah,
Can't.
you know. Mics are on.
Mics are hot. Um, yeah, you guys want to go? Let's do it.
Yep.
All right. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Hello. All right. All right. Hi, I'm Bill Neidhart. I'm a partner at Left Link Strategies, a firm that worked on Brandon Johnson's mayoral campaign, a victorious mayoral campaign. We're going to host a panel here that talks about how we did it, what it means for the progressive movement, and how the lessons of Chicago, the lessons we learned here, how they can apply to progressive campaigns everywhere. But before we get started, we'll get into introductions. We'll start with Stacy.
Good afternoon. I'm really a teacher, so I expect some like call and response. Yeah, teachers in the house. Good afternoon and welcome to Chicago. Yeah. My name is Stacy Davis Gates. I am the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. Yeah. Shout out to labor and teachers, and I am also chair of the United Working Families space in Chicago. And Brandon Johnson and I started at the Chicago Teachers Union on the same day. And now I get to call him my mayor.
Brandon?
I'm Brandon Davis. I am the managing partner of a firm called Technicolor Political. We were the media team for the paid media team for the Brandon Johnson for Mayor campaign. I live here in Chicago now after about 13 years in Washington, D.C. I'm back in the real world, and it's nice to be. During that 13 years, I spent time as the national political director for SEIU and the chief of staff at the DNC. So I've had a chance over the last 20 years to do a lot of work on democratic and progressive causes, none more important than this one. So.
Then Karthik.
I'm Karthik. I worked alongside Bill to help run the Earn Media program for Brandon Johnson's mayoral campaign. Before that, I've done a lot of work throughout the progressive movement, specifically in climate change related stuff and on Bernie's 2016 presidential campaign. This was an exciting win, and I learned that I love spending time in Chicago, even in February. So that's how you know. That's how you know it's real. Excited to talk about it.
Yeah, so we're going to, I have some questions for the panel, obviously. We've all talked to each other a lot over the course of this campaign, so we don't only want to just leave it to us. We're open to audience QAs throughout. We're not going to save it for the last part. If something we say inspires a question in you, sparks a question, you already have one locked and ready to roll, just throw up your hand and I'll go to you once we're wrapped up with an individual comment or something like that. But please, we really want to participate with you because the real thing we're trying to do here is we feel like we tried out some things, did some things different, threw out a conventional playbook and ran with one that had been in formulation for years here in Chicago, and that'll actually be the basis of my first question in a second. But we want you to ask and to be curious and try to poke holes if you can, because there are some. But we really want to share all of our knowledge with you. So we'll start. First question, I'll ask it to Stacy here, because Stacy, you live here in Chicago. You've been part of the Treatment Not Trauma campaign. You name any grassroots, yes, you name any grassroots effort, whether it's a teacher strike or any door-to-door activity, yet you've probably talked to millions of Chicagoans yourself at this point. So one of the key lessons that I saw in Brandon's campaign is that this didn't start when he decided to run for office. This is something that we've been building for a long time.
Right.
So I want to start with that history. What lessons were you bringing in from these years of grassroots efforts on the ground, and how did we apply them to Brandon's campaign?
You know what's interesting is that I was having this conversation a couple of weeks ago in the same way that people have the discussion about when did the civil rights movement start? Was it Emmett Till? Was it Rosa Parks? Was it Plessy v. Ferguson? Like, what was the thing that instigated the thing? And what I would say is that Chicago enjoys a kind of working class, revolutionary spirit. And it's always been here, right? What triggers this ability for people to like stake their claim and claim their space? That is probably survival, right? And in a deeply segregated city like Chicago, in order to survive it, you got to figure out how to fight. And so in 2007, SEIU, by the way, with ACORN at the time and other community groups figured out how to anchor a fight about workers in big boxes. And they challenged the status quo. And they learned a lot of things there. And then in 2012, Karen Lewis, the iconic revolutionary leader, Black woman of the Chicago Teachers Union, reinstigated a spark of activism and unapologetic get what we need-ism in Chicago. And so I would say our strike helped to normalize headlines and demands and regular rallies and work stoppages and protests, regularize it. It didn't mean it wasn't already going on. But we helped to normalize it, and we helped to give it content and description and narrative, and then we legitimized this ability to grow. And here's the thing that unions have to do. We funded it, even if we didn't understand it, even if it wasn't our, quote, bread and butter. So this idea that we get to Brandon Johnson, if I'm honest, we are so proud of that. And that was not the intention.
Thank you. And this campaign would not have been possible without Stacey's leadership. And she mentioned a name that I think all of us on the campaign, Karen Lewis, was a huge figure to the campaign. I can tell you that. And a lot of what we were trying to do is just keep her memory alive and do the work that she set out. But I want to turn to my immediate guys here. Here's a question. How the hell did we do it? How did we win? I want to start with you, Brandon, because we were being outspent 3-1. You know the exact numbers, but on TV specifically, Paul Vallis was spending not just more than us. He was double, triple what we were able to do. So can you start by telling us how much we were being outspent by, and then how did that inform your strategy? Because I know progressive campaigns out there have been in a place where they're being outspent. Yeah. Even the bad ones, even the ones that are really in it, don't have to face 3-1.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Well, we didn't start out by being outspent. We had to close the deal by being being outspent. So just contextually to answer the question of how we did it, well, we got the most votes. But how did we get the most votes? I think it's a.
That's the answer. Thank you.
It's a legitimate path. I mean, look. One, you begin with, we had the goods. We had an authentic candidate that was of the people and was supported by the people, had a voice to speak to the people, and had a position of understanding to speak to. And so it begins with that. Candidates really do matter, and their ability to connect and inspire people really does matter. The second thing that we had was a fairly fearless campaign. The Jason Lee, the campaign manager, with the backing of CTU and Stacey primarily, along with, SEIU and others. But the willingness to spend money early, we had the goods, but we also had a 2% name ID when we started. And so it wasn't quite as simple as, as a path as it would have been had we been starting from a higher position. But what we had was folks who weren't afraid to go all in early. A lot of times you have campaigns where the idea is, well, let's hedge a little bit. Let's see how it plays out over the next 3 months and then make a decision, or next 3 weeks and then make a decision. And this campaign began spending on the same day, to communicate on the same day that Paul Vallis did. We started the same day, and we were able to be at the kind of parity early that allowed us to go from relative unknown, known within the movement, but not known to broader voters, to bouncing a incumbent mayor for the first time in 40 years in this city, and then winning a runoff where we were outspent 3-1. We were outspent by Vallis, but not just Vallis, but outside spenders who can be more aggressive and who don't have the same backlash politically that a candidate does for aggressive negative spending. So the 12.4 million, I think it is, to 4 million spending is a big difference in a race where the spending is on what many people at the time thought was the most potent issue in Democratic politics, the idea of defunding the police. And so it's not just that we were outspent. We were outspent with a dog whistle that I think most people expected the combination of those two things would carry the day. But what we did, I think, very effectively in the campaign was amplify what we had, a candidate that was able to connect with people. And ultimately, because of focused spending, making a set of choices that, one, we weren't going to spend traditionally. We started the campaign, Stacey and I talk about this all the time. You got a candidate with 2% name ID, you can either spend twice as much on 30-second ads saying his name, or you can spend half as much to get twice as much on 15-second ads. And so we blanketed the airways early with the connection of Brandon's name and something that people cared about, how he would engage. We didn't start the campaign with the traditional bio ads because nobody cared about our biography. We had to convince people that we cared about them and that he had a plan for the city before people cared about his biography. We didn't run bio ads until the runoff. We ran ads that were about what he would do for the city and why he understood your day-to-day life, because right now the only utility that candidates have in this political environment is authenticity. That is the only valuable thing that candidates have in a fairly cynical environment where people just don't believe in much and haven't been given a lot of reason to believe in much. And so we use that time to connect with people, to tell our story, to inoculate against the hits that we knew ultimately were coming, and to define ourselves. And we defined Brandon as what he was: a man raising his family on the west side of Chicago, an educator, someone who had dealt with the same kind of challenges and both violence in community and the kinds of responses that had not produced answers. And that understanding would translate to someone who in a mayor's office, when they had the opportunity to do the right thing for the people, would do it because he understood. And that's the story we told, and that fundamentally changed the electorate, which is what the path to victory was here. When you look back at the electorate, and this is the last thing I'll say before handing it off to Karthik, the byproduct of the strategy and the approach that we took, focused spending, not spending all our money on broadcast television or cable, but understanding that voters are in different places, engaging local creators to create content that didn't feel like campaign content, that felt like content from people that were speaking your language. The byproduct of that was a huge influx of younger voters in the runoff election. And the way that we were able to win was by changing fundamentally the makeup of the electorate in the runoff. 31.6% is the number greater of 18 to 24-year-olds that turned out in the runoff than turned out in the general election just a little over a month earlier. 24.5%, that's the number of 25 to 34-year-olds that turned out earlier. So ultimately, that plus 55 age group that has often defined the outcome of the election in Chicago was actually diminished, and their vote share went down by 7.5%. That's how you win in a race where you're outspent, by not fighting in the electorate that you can't win with, but changing the very makeup of the electorate by talking to people that you want to be a part of the electorate.
And I can't understate enough how when the first ads came out and they were 15 seconds and it just was Brandon Johnson, Brandon is better.
Brandon is better.
Brandon is better. And it was clear, concise. I was worried. I was like, 15 seconds, is this enough?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I wasn't gonna doubt you, but people talked a little shit. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like, I don't know if you can.
I
Really...
wasn't.
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah.
Like the team was on board. Stacy was one of the first people to call and say, "I love this strategy." And
Yep.
you know, like when the team is on board, that makes a huge difference. But not everybody, like people don't take risks. They
Yes.
really don't.
But I will say, it was an ad about him being on the West Side, you know, not even diving deep into it, but as soon as the campaign started going places and holding events, and Brandon is Better became a chant that they were, and Brandon es mejor as well, it would just come out of nowhere. And that's when I was kind of like, oh, well, that 15-second ad might actually do something. I'm going to go to my business partner here, my partner in crime and campaigns, but not both. So Karthik, I actually want to get into what this panel is supposed to be about, public safety messaging.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to lose, so every reporter that we talked to, we were supposed to lose because defund was going to kill us. So I just want to ask, how do you defund, and what lessons did we learn here that we know other candidates, other campaigns are going to face and are facing and have faced in other places? Are there lessons that you can learn from Chicago, or was this a Chicago-specific thing?
No, I don't think it's a Chicago-specific thing. I think, you know, one of the places my mind immediately goes, we were all in the war room on election night, and we're watching the results trickle in. You know, people are just, typical election day stuff, where people are just getting texts, turnout's high in this one precinct, turnout's low in this place, it's all over, you know. A lot of the traditional election day buzz. And we saw a local news segment where they were, the Chiron read, defunding the police, right? That was the Chiron on TV. And the video was a clip of Brandon Johnson saying, I'm not going to defund the police. Which just encapsulates to me so much of sort of how, like, that was so much of our experience with kind of like the way that the media treated this issue, but the way that I think our political culture more broadly tends to approach these issues. We saw at the beginning in every poll, right, when we were polling at 2.8%, that, you know, the first, second, and third issue on the minds of Chicago voters was this feeling that crime has gone up all over the place. And people felt unsafe, and you just saw it all over the place. And I think, you know, I think the way that a lot of campaigns have tended to approach that in the past is by leaning into traditional sort of tough on crime messaging, right? More money for police, and you know, throw people in jail, like that sort of messaging and that sort of framework for approaching this. And to the question of how we did it, I mean, one of the other ways that we did it is by really sticking true to our values, which is what I'm really proud of about this race. We as a team, but Brandon specifically as a candidate, did not want to win by just saying things that he thought people wanted to hear. He knew that people felt unsafe, but he wasn't just going to tell them that we're going to hire more police, we're going to, you know, hire thousands of officers overnight. All of these things that sort of we saw that the press kind of expected him to say, that other candidates were saying, and so they expected him to say that. And he was holding firm on, you know, the root causes of crime are poverty, and, you know, are much more complex than just the amount of funding in a police department. And if you don't believe that, you can look at the historical funding for police departments, and you can increase funding for police departments a whole lot, and crime doesn't always go down in correlation to that. And so I think Brandon really wanted to challenge this notion that to make people feel heard on the issue of crime, you have to just advocate for more police funding. He wanted to articulate a different vision of what was possible. And so, you know, one of the big lessons here for me on how you deal with this issue is you can hold true to your values, because voters do understand. Voters, I think, are smarter than a lot of pundits give them credit for, where if they feel, I think that a lot of people do feel unsafe, a lot of people do feel like crime has gone up. You know, a lot of people know someone who's been carjacked or something like that. These are real issues, but I think like people understand that it is more complex than just throwing more money at the police. That there is, you know, that they responded to what Brandon was selling, which is we need to invest in youth employment, right? Summer programs for youth, like all of the things that we've seen work in other cities. Brandon framed that as investing in people, and people really responded to that message. And so the big lesson for me is you can treat voters like adults. They're willing to have real conversations about these issues. It's not a binary choice between being anti-police or pro-police, and those are the only two ways to deal with crime. They're not. There's a whole other way to deal with crime that has to do with the actual underlying causes. And so we were able to do that. And then the last thing I'll say about defund is you kind of have to. One of the things that we tried, and we sort of shifted to this at a pretty late point in the campaign, but there was a certain point in the campaign when Paul Vallis's campaign was not really about anything other than Brandon is a defund the police candidate. I think that was all that they were spending money on TV. It wasn't anything about him. It wasn't ideas about how to address transportation or the budget or crime or really anything. It was just Brandon Johnson is going to defund the police. That was what they were putting millions of dollars behind on TV. And so we pointed out something that's true, which is that that's what Republicans say about Democrats. That's what they say about Nancy Pelosi. That's what they say about Joe Biden. Like this is not an unusual attack. And so I think just like showing the puppet strings being pulled there a little bit of just like this is not a unique thing. This is just how it's a sort of baseless claim that people, it's a smear that people throw at candidates whenever they're up against a Democrat. And we saw that really took some of the mythical power out of this attack. Like Brandon talks about this a lot, but there's this feeling that this attack is so powerful that it cannot possibly be negated. And I think what we showed here is that there's a way to do that. You can sort of show why they're saying what they're saying, which is just this is what Republicans say about Democrats, and then articulate your own position on the issue of crime that treats voters intelligently and treats them like adults, and has a more nuanced, complicated set of solutions to deal with the issue, and people really respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Stacey?
You know what? And if Chicago had not been organized by Black, unapologetically Black organizers in this intervening period where you understand who Rakia is and who Laquan is, then he doesn't win. So let me be clear. Yes, 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 and. You have to have a multi-year struggle and coalition with a whole bunch of people to create a space in which you can be authentic to your values. Because that doesn't happen everywhere.
It's true.
And you can't have a cogent discussion about public safety, because that's also what you did with this campaign, is that you didn't have a conversation about defund. You had a conversation about public safety with a Black man on the west side of Chicago who lives in one of the most violent neighborhoods. So you had this perfect constellation of everything at the same time. That helps as well, but we did this because we built it. So when we talk about like the last two huge campaigns, United Working Families, our Coalition of Labor, this loose constellation of people who get down when it's time to get down. We came together, it was with Delia, right, who is a congresswoman from Illinois. Shout out, come on, you're in Chicago. And then we get a mayor. Both of these individuals come from the same place, the same movement. They didn't organize to become mayor and congressperson. They organized to create a better, more equitable, just space. Yep. And so they get a amen corner, and people who don't really care. Listen, we have people who did not want our union or our movement to play electorally like this, because there's contradictions in all this complexity. And values are tested in this space. So how do you do this becomes, what are you fighting for? What do we need, and how do we consolidate on that? But you can't do that with someone who parachutes in. It's got to come organically through the struggle. And both of these individuals came through the struggle, so that's why I'm saying that it was laborious to repeat it over and over again, but that's also an organizer's job. And Brandon Johnson, paid organizer from the Chicago Teachers Union, is Mayor Johnson because he got reps.
Yes.
And he had authenticity because they remembered when they fill in the blank. Delia Ramirez can withstand a defund attack too, because she was attacked in the same way in DuPage County, which is a county that elects Republicans too, and can win on the vision of instead of the defense of. Like, we get to play offense, but you can play offense because you create the court under which you play offense. That's the organizing.
Yeah, really good point there. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Jump in.
No, it's just spot on. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid of the attack. Like, it's
Yes.
just not as, it has been so overused by the right that it lacks context anymore. And we shouldn't be afraid of it in the ways that I think sometimes we are. And the way to fight against it is to force it into the light, but also to have a plan. People want to be safe. They want a plan that's smart. And so I think being able to articulate what you will do, it's not about, accepting the frame of the argument, defund or not. That is necessary but insufficient. What matters is being able to define a path to actually help people to feel safer in their community, because that's what people want. Brandon used to say very regularly, the challenge with being black in Chicago is we need to police the most, yet we're most concerned when we have to call them. And I think that just resonated with people. That is how I feel a lot of times. And so I think really speaking to that and claiming the mantle, and then I can't underscore what Stacey said more, the environment has been created. We're about to go through a series of races to determine Supreme Court justices and state's attorneys, and the environment is very different now in that voters, I think, understand that elected officials have a role to play here, and they're holding elected officials accountable to playing a role here. And so the environment is no longer sort of, our folks don't see the value in those races. Our base voters don't turn out in those races because they don't see the value, because we're constantly talking about that now. And they actually see the value more in localized races like mayor, like state's attorney, than sometimes they even see in their voting for the presidency, given the gridlock in Washington, D.C. And so there's just a lot of different cross currents that I think we should recognize, that the environment is shifting under our feet constantly. And we shouldn't, true to old notions. We have to, evaluate the environment as it is now, and create the environments that we want to run races in. I think that's very well said, Stacey.
And again, if you do have questions, raise your hand at any point and I'll call on you, because we want to, this happened in Chicago, we want it to happen somewhere else. We want it to continue happening, continue building, and we know the grassroots isn't just here. It's been building everywhere. Yeah, I'll go with you, and then we'll come up for you. Do you want to stand up and really project? Really obnoxiously.
Do you think in part it's a matter of, Democrats just need to, control the narrative and not play into, Republican talking points? Because it sounds like, I remember all the mailers I was getting, and so much I was hearing about, Paul Vallas basically being a Republican, had made anti-abortion comments. He had said that he viewed himself as more of a Republican than a Democrat in the past. He had made racist remarks, and so then just saying effectively, you're just repeating the same things that Republicans say. You call yourself a Republican, so just basically kind of ignoring what they're saying and yanking the rug out from under them and not letting them have the power that they act like they have but they don't really have. Or how do you think narrative building ties in with the work that you've been doing?
Thank you for reading off the text of our mailers, TV scripts, and word for word. That must have worked. Either of you want to?
I'll start.
Yeah.
I'll start. Yes, that's exactly right. I think we do need to. It's as Brandon just said. It's about. This isn't the whole thing, but we can't keep having a conversation about. If the whole race is a question of does Brandon Johnson want to defund the police, that's not a good outcome for us. you have to change the points our campaign we're trying to make were exactly the ones you mentioned. Also, we put out detailed policy positions on nearly every issue that matters to people, including how to get the city out of a structural budget deficit that it's been stuck in for a really long time. And so I think people, that's exactly right. It's not getting stuck on the frame that the opponent wants the race to be on. It's about taking on these issues on your own frame.
Stacey, Brandon, either of you?
No, I think that's all good points.
Yeah. I'll come to you next. I'll go to her right now.
So, my question is really about what public safety looks like. This is the panel, right? And so I think earlier, Brandon, you said that crime polled for everybody was an important issue. So, crime impacts Black Chicago residents, Latinx Chicago residents, like across the board. It seemed that you identified that as an issue.
Yeah.
But I think what safety looks like to Chicagoans wasn't just, Brandon had a broader vision of what safety looked like. And can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's really important to understand that everybody has is not happy. Nobody was happy with the crime situation in Chicago, but people's vision of what safe looked like, I guess, resonated with Brandon's vision as opposed to Mr. Vallis's vision.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. This is not a race that was won because we were able to deflect the question of defund. This race was won because there were two competing visions for how you create public safety, and people chose Brandon Johnson's vision for how you create public safety, period. If you don't take anything else away from this conversation, take that away from this conversation, because we had a fight over two positions. Our position won. And Brandon's position was that one, we have to address the root causes of crime. If you want to reduce crime, then go to why crime is moving in the wrong direction. People need security. People need jobs. People need people need homes. People need the basics of life. There are also, we know that there is a rampant mental health crisis in this country that is largely undiagnosed and largely unacknowledged. And people know that. Like the amount of focus groups that I see, that conversation and the way that conversation has really evolved to be part of solutions, investing in mental health. People understand that mass incarceration is not a path to public safety, that you really have to solve the sicknesses that socially are moving us toward a less safe environment. And so dealing with mental health. And then I think, there's a lot of conversation, there was a lot of conversation during the months of the election and since about young people in this city and about young people all across the country. And some of it is that, what has become a level of thrill seeking that was way different when I was, in my 20s or in my teens. It's just different. And so I think some of it is dealing with the way that has evolved. But a lot of it is dealing with giving our kids a path to a future and developing and investing in them as opposed to demonizing them. And so when Karthik said earlier that this is really multifaceted, that this is not one single thing, I think that's what we did. And we used our media content to deconstruct the issue. You got to invest in people. That was the narrative of the campaign, to get to the narrative question earlier. It wasn't, the narrative wasn't about defund or not. The narrative was about investing in people and investing in communities. That was the choice. Either do that or don't. Brandon said do that. And when you do that, then you invest in mental health. You put people in positions where mental health crises are not the responsibility of the police, who are not equipped to deal with those. And that puts us in worse situations. And you invest in jobs and in ways that people can actually create a life for themselves, which reduces the desire to engage in criminal activity.
And all of this work had a place because it already had a debate in the city. So again, I want to underscore the fact that Rahm Emanuel, when he was mayor in Chicago, closed mental health clinics here. And so there had been a protracted struggle on that issue. Police accountability became an issue for the voters to vote for people who now have the ability to hold that space accountable. So there have been a series of debates on if that should even happen. There have been a series of debates on if school resource officers should be in schools. So there was a place where people were engaged and who wanted to engage with other people. So you had door knockers and you had people on the telephone and you had volunteers who could see their issue manifest when when most people are paying attention. So these things work together, especially if you're going to take this position and be real about it.
Right.
And to that point, that campaign was successful in changing public opinion because if not that polling's everything, but if the poll that we ran had our argument for what we would do for public safety versus Paul's. No defund or whatever, just our argument versus Paul's, and ours was more popular.
Every time.
Just on the baseline level, our argument for public safety was more popular with Chicagoans. That was a big part of it. More questions?
Hi, thank you for all for being here. I really appreciate it. You guys talked about how you don't think that Chicago is an exception when it comes to public safety messaging. And I just wanted to ask, what do you guys make of the 2021 New York mayoral race, where the current mayor ran on a pretty strong, I'd say, tough on crime message? How would you, I guess, contrast that? And I think the sort of second part of that question is, I think most people agree with Mayor Johnson's tackling the root causes of crime, but how do you, campaign style, how do you succinctly message that in a way that, I mean, it's a long and nuanced conversation, as you guys said, but how do you package it in something that is easily digestible to voters? Does that make sense? Thanks.
That's a good question.
Well,
Don't make the New Yorker take that question first.
Yeah,
Do you want to do that?
well, I think that it was very difficult to be succinct, frankly. And I think the thing that we tried to do most was get to the narrative point, right? The details really matter, and the details were a part of a lot of our ads, but there were more details than we could put into 30 seconds. And, frankly, there were different things that people wanted to hear. But what we were consistent about were the ideas that the issues undergirded. So a lot of times in campaigns, we always want to lean into policy so heavily. And for average voters, that's not really where they live. They live in this notion of more, are you with me or are you not? Do you agree with the things that I value or not? And people value investing in one another and investing in communities. That was a choice. It was either, bulk up an arm that is designed to lean into the cliche of tough on crime, or invest in people in a way that elevates them and puts the power in their hands to decide how they'll move the city forward. Or this idea that we ought to be dealing with mental health crises and issues in the city, and that's not the job of the police. So it was more, I think it was less trying to squeeze every policy prescription into every ad, but more making sure that we were putting forth these big ideas. When they tell you defund the police, they want to play a political game. I'm not going to play that political game. I'm going to talk to you about how we get to public safety. So it was really about the values more than it was about trying to outline a policy prescription in every ad. And I think that's how we were able to, I think, effectively do it.
And I'll just add that I think one of the things that really helped that succeed is, what we also didn't do was just do an ad that said invest in people, right? Because that sounds hollow on its own. Like you need a couple of things to support that, and we did. It's about striking this balance between not getting super in the weeds, obviously, on policy stuff. Like we do have a several thousand-word public safety plan on the campaign site. Go check it out if you're masochistic. But we didn't get into all that. But we did say something that makes sense to people is Brandon said a lot, and we said in our ads we're going to hire 200 more detectives to bring down the clearance rate. That's a really concrete example of a way we're going to address crime, right? It's not like people understand that murders go unsolved, that a lot of times, thefts go unsolved, and so 200 more detectives. We're going to reopen mental health clinics that have closed. There's a couple of concrete, specific points that illustrate what we mean when we say investing in people. So I think we found the right balance. So kudos.
And don't underestimate the proxy of his identity and his address, his home address. That was also the shorthand. So when you talk about shorthand, how do you say it quickly? I'm a father raising my family in one of the most violent zip codes in this city.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course I'm invested.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But yeah, and as someone, the only person on this stage that actually ranked Maya Wiley first on their ballot, I can tell you that what we did a little differently that they weren't doing in New York is, to give Eric Adams credit, he ran with a very clear agenda of what he was going to do about public safety. And I don't think the progressives really met that in New York, and we're still kind of paying for it right now. But we've shown a model here where that kind of clarity comes in, but we're going to do more questions. You're next.
Okay. Hi, my name's Mariah. I'm a part of the Safety and Justice Council at Mikvah Challenge, and this is my team right here in this row. And basically, we're wondering, how did the idea of your definition surrounding public safety come about? And more specifically, who did you talk to come to this conclusion of public safety? Does that include aldermen, youth, or the whole community?
All of the above. Again, when you're an so here's the least talked about thing about this campaign, is that Brandon Johnson, the mayor of this city, is an organizer. He was not an operative, he was an organizer, like literally an organizer. And so when you say, where does it come from? It comes from organizing people to a vision. But in order to organize people to a vision, you have to sit with the reality. And so people in Chicago, we are out here surviving. And in the role that he had and in the communities on the West Side where he was organizing, he had to sit with that and hear that and understand that. And that's how your values are fortified. And then you work in coalition if you work at CTU. And so you have to sit in other people's spaces in order to get the real work done. And so you have to hear that. So the least talked about thing is not all of the other stuff, but it's the fact that he is legit an organizer.
I want to jump, if you don't mind. Stacy, you 6th Ward, right? You live in the 6th
Yeah.
Ward? You've been running canvases, talking about treatment, not trauma, talking about a positive vision of public safety for years. Did that give you confidence going into this? Did that give you, how did that inform kind of our campaign, I guess you could say?
So, we have, again, I want to continue to shout out the young-ish and younger people, Black youth, who are leading a lot of the work as it relates to a different vision of public safety, treatment, not trauma, the Peace Book, et cetera. They are leading this conversation. And when you have young people who are leading the conversation, the idea should be, how do you also help support, resource it? And so the United Working Family space did a ballot measure in the 6th Ward and got value, organizing is always a poll, right? It's always a poll, and especially if you put it on the ballot thereafter, you get it. And so they did a poll. Do people want the type of traumatic supports? Do they want a whole community approach to public safety? And Black voters in a very working class, middle class environment, people who are on year 37 of their 30-year mortgage, right? Or are living in that home for the 3rd generation. These are Black people who finally got a thing. So they're not gonna risk it or do anything that would challenge it first. and they agree that it is treatment over trauma, and that is what they want. So this idea that black people just want to lock people up is a conservative, simplistic, baseless notion of the complexity of how we deal with public safety. We've lived in a place where we've never been safe. So we deal with complexity very well. And so we can have a complex discussion with black voters. And if you're winning anything as a Democrat, you got to talk to us. So the complexity is there. Try it on the door sometimes. Trust that we don't just get seduced by the repetitive nature of the commercial. Yes, and if you are presenting me with a contrast, not what I don't want, what do I want? Speak to that. And that's what this should teach us. It's possible. The convention of how we encountered the fund before this campaign was a losing convention. Don't do it anymore. Right? You got a new motto. So lift that up a little higher. And that motto doesn't just include the operations of a campaign, it includes the grassroots that help to give you a platform, a capacity, and an electorate that is more educated, because they're organizing them to that.
We have basically 15 minutes left, but that's pretty much the whole thing right there. I'm going to a potentially hostile question here. I'm worried about it.
I have a question for Brandon and Stacey, because to your point at the beginning of the panel, like, where did this start? And I think part of the conversation that's missed around Brandon Johnson's win to the mayor's race takes us back to 2019, when the CTU decided to go out on strike, and before that, work actions taken by the SEIU, where Brandon, you formerly were. And so talking about and we all understand that cities are ecosystems, so you can't have public safety without high quality neighborhood public schools. So my question to both of y'all is, and also I would add that in the runoff, you guys sort of fired your boss at a time when teachers' unions are under attack all across the country. So to beat the boss actually matters. But how do you sort of define the architecture of the win, beginning with a campaign against Lori Lightfoot that sort of started when she began her mayoral tenure to getting to defeating Brandon?
A movement holds people accountable. And so the former mayor won based in large part of her adoption of the movement's platform for equity and justice in the city. And what was underestimated was the severity of the need that movement had and what it was willing to do in order to receive it. And it helps when I know you before, when we've struggled together before and we enter into agreement together, which that didn't happen with the former mayor. That juxtaposed to an organizing tradition. And I want to say this because I think that this is the secret sauce. You have labor in this city that is willing to invest in that which is unseen, necessary, and deeply unconventional, rooted in Black liberation. You don't get that everywhere. So do not underestimate the necessity of a Greg Kelly, a Erica Bland, a Diane Palmer. Because if you underestimate those people, all Black labor leaders, Jeff Howard, all Black, who are investing in the liberation in ways in which run counter to what we are taught to do in leadership. They are not holding the ball, they are passing it, and they shooting it. So that part, I think, is what I would underscore the most about that. Like, you don't get these guys here and pay for them. You don't trust Brandon for a 15-second commercial if you don't know him already. But he also understands it, see, and that's the beauty of having some sort of synergy in this way. Their biographies and their work and their commitment matters. No one takes a campaign. Jason Lee with a candidate polling at 2%. but he's an organizer too and was trained at our Summer Organizing Institute at the Chicago Teachers Union. Like, these are everything people tell you about campaigns. We ain't do that. And we practiced that. We didn't just do it in the mayoral campaign, we practiced it. And we created spaces in which to do it, United Working Families. I don't know what else you asked. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, that is, I think the only thing I would underscore is what you said, Stacey, about the notion of liberation, and I think that what people saw was this race and Brandon's election became part of that path.
That's right.
So it was woven into and integrated into a larger desire and a larger outcome that people were working toward, and this became a next step. Like, I guess that is the way I would connect the dots on a lot of what you've said, Stacey, is this is an ongoing effort. It's been it didn't start with this race. It doesn't end with this election. It doesn't end with this first term as mayor. It is an ongoing fight in a direction toward a thing, and each of these is a piece of the building block for that. So if you want to start to move a city, then make sure you're building the building blocks. It doesn't start by waking up one day and saying, "Oh, there's going to be there's a weakened mayor running." No, you got to put that mayor in that position. You got to build the grassroots infrastructure that can capture the moment, that can rally around, that actually has power. Like, all those things are the kindling for a fire that people can rally around, is what I would say.
And that question came from Richard, our friend, who works with AFT. And I have to say, CTU, everyone knows Brandon, Stacey, they were at CTU, but our entire labor coalition, SEIU,
That's right.
AFT, if it wasn't for AFT, I don't know if we'd be sitting here. So
We wouldn't.
I do want to shine a light. We wouldn't be. I do want to shine a light on the fact that we had a coalition of many kinds, but our labor coalition in particular stepped up.
That's right.
And it can't be discounted. There's a few more questions we're going to get to. You just forgot. Do you want to help me out?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Annabelle. My question is just related to what the South and Southwest side strategy was for engaging voters. So I went out and I canvassed with some friends, and I think there's two incidences that really stuck out to me. One was when I knocked on someone's door in like a huge apartment complex on the south side, and the man who I was speaking to, he didn't open the door, so I was communicating all through the door. But he had said, "I've never voted before, and I don't think I'm going to go out and vote." And then the other incident was someone who, it was canvassing during the runoff portion of the race, and he said to me, he's like, "I thought Brandon already won." And I was like, "No, you got to go out and vote again in the runoff." So I'm curious if there was like a civic engagement component to the campaign strategy, the messaging strategy, and how that was specifically targeted to communities where voter registration isn't as high as it should be, and I don't think it's as high as we would want it to be.
Where did you knock doors?
I was all over, but Hyde Park.
Hyde Park, yeah. And what organization were you with? You were just solo? This is why we won. Karthik, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think during the runoff, we saw this in the polling. We saw this sort of as one of the central tasks that we needed to do. I experienced, I had a lot of conversations with Uber drivers that felt similar to what you're talking about, right? And I think for me, it came back to like the core arguments we were trying to make, and our field team did an incredible job of like making sure that people knew they had to vote, that the election wasn't over. It was obviously it was a weirdly constructed calendar, right? You're talking about it's really cold outside, and the dates felt pretty random. It was just like it was like election calendar that was almost constructed to incentivize low turnout. And so there was definitely a part of it that was like making people know, making sure people knew that they had to come out and vote. But I think like, you know, I was surprised by sort of the level of like people knew that there was, because they felt it. If you turn on the TV for 10 seconds, there's no way to avoid the, like, we're talking about the $12 million that the Vallas campaign was spending. Like, you turn on the TV, you see the flashing lights of the cop car. That was it. That was Chicago in February and March. And so I think people did know that there was like I think people felt that there was like a battle being waged and that it was important. I think our campaign did a lot of the right things to capitalize on that and make sure people knew to come out and vote.
And I'll also just add, you know, we actually had people like you knocking doors, and we knew that Vallas had people paid to do it, but he didn't have UFW to tap into. UWF. Yeah, UWF. He didn't have existing grassroots organizations that were already doing that work. And I'm sure all of us have been in touch with some sort of campaign where we know we're going to be outspent, but we're going to rely on the field. This is one of the few times where, like, we knew we could actually rely on the field, and that made a huge difference. Let's do some more. Go here.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak to the role of memes in the campaign, which sounds kind of silly, but was actually really powerful. I feel like throughout the campaign on Instagram, there would just be different images of Brandon's face. You know, it was the bootlegs for Brandon, a lot of great art just created by the people. And you talk about the youth vote coming in through during the runoff. It feels like there was a lot of energy organically on social media through some of these kind of artistic and meme type pieces.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on this. I have to shout out someone on our team who did an incredible job with some of that. Her name is Naomi, and she's kind of one of the unsung heroes of this race. She did a lot of incredible work on the meme front. There's some really incredible stuff. Check out the TikTok. I'm a big fan. But a lot of it is also just like, as you're mentioning, a lot of it's organic, right? Like Brandon said earlier that one of the key things, one of the key currencies that a campaigner, a candidate has in this day and age is authenticity. And I think once you convey that, and once people have a feel for who you are and what you stand for, that stuff flows organically from that. Like, we didn't, we're coordinating, we've got, but we didn't send some message to a listserv, and that's why that meme was created, Like people just were inspired. People felt a certain way about Brandon, and so they were taking it upon themselves. They knocked doors, right? Like, that is, if you make people feel something, like, that's kind of one of my bigger takeaways is, like, if you tap into something real, like, people respond to that and are really generous with their own time and creativity.
The culture, you can't force cultural moments. You can create the opportunity, and you can create a level of authenticity that sort of helps create momentum. We did a lot of work in the paid with local creators, and I think that carried a lot of weight. I mean, I recommend to people, just thinking about the numbers, right? We spend a lot of money based on points, and we hope that we get the right eyeballs when we really can analyze what people's followers are and who's engaging with their content, and ensure that we're getting the right eyeballs by engaging with local creators whose creativity gets outside of the box that people don't like, which is standard political ads. So I would say it's really, more and more is becoming the coin of the realm. We've been experimenting a lot with the right size content for TikTok and Snapchat, because voters 18 to 24, I would venture to say, there aren't a lot of concrete numbers here, but probably 40 to 60% of them are getting all their news now from those two platforms. News, like, not entertainment, but like news. What's going on in the world is coming from those platforms. So I think we recognized that, and we spent accordingly based on that, and I think that helped catalyze some of what came out. But the culture decides whether or not it believes in you, and it believed in Brandon, and that's what showed up at the end.
I'm going to shamelessly, there were many, your team leading creative video, we put a lot of it on social media when we couldn't put it on TV, right? We had very limited resources, but there was so much energy and commitment to just bringing this stuff to light. I'm sure it's been on a lot of your feeds. There were just videos that were Paul Vallis saying who's more of a Republican than a Democrat, and we just had that going a bunch of times. But we were making a bunch of creative stuff that was for social media, and it was in a way where it wasn't like a gimmick.
Paul Vallis hates house music. Did you know that?
Yes, yes.
Did you know that Lori Lightfoot's Super Bowl snack tray? Total bullshit. Like these things, I mean,
Yeah.
you may not think these things matter.
They do.
They matter.
Nothing's like a Brandon Davis phone call about someone's Super Bowl tray. I'm just like, what the hell is this guy talking about? It's actually, all right, I'm going to do something. We're going to take a reporter question, so just watch out. We're going against the rules here.
Thanks so much, guys. Hey, Lee John Greco, a reporter with The Guardian. I did talk with voters in Austin and in Little Village on Election Day, and they did express these really nuanced views about public safety. But I am going to push back a little bit on what you guys said earlier about Brandon Johnson staying true to his values, because when it did come to defund the police, he did walk back some comments that he said in 2020 during his campaign. So, that being said, I'm just curious, what are you guys, especially in the media strategy side, what are you saying to your colleagues who are, going to work on campaigns in 2024? What are you telling them when it comes to approaching, terms like defund or abolition? I was just chatting with some other Midwest folks who were, sort of jokingly mentioning that they would never put abolition on a mailer. So, is the strategy just try and avoid those terms or tackle them in a different way?
It is to give the respect and integrity to those terms that they deserve. So let's start there. So much of how people come to the public safety and the intensity of defund is because people who are not impacted immediately and intensely by it, they don't get an opportunity to have the discussion. And so he didn't walk it back. What he did was tell you that it was more complex than defund. He told you that I call them and I'm scared when they come. That's what he told you, and we have to create a space, reporters, to have that particular discussion, because that is the real discussion. You can't talk to me about abolition if you can't talk to me about the mother who deals with the both and of raising a black child on the south side of Chicago. And that is the space, that is the voice, and that is the place in which this debate was had. That's why he won. So those are the lessons. It's not if he can put the most radical term in a commercial. It is, can he speak to the complexity, the reality, and the need that I have in order to keep my son safe in this city? So that's what you got, Brandon. Brandon?
Yeah, we're telling colleagues some of what I said earlier. I think there's a prescription here. One is, don't be afraid of the mythical power of defund attacks.
Yeah.
Two is have a perspective and say it loudly and say it often. We need to, elected officials should have a perspective on public safety. Like, that's not an unreasonable thing for voters to want. And so I think that there's no cowering here. Three, set up a contrast. Make very clear, don't allow people to hide behind defund attacks. One of the things that we found out with just a little bit of scratching is that Paul Vallis didn't have a plan for how to make the city safer. Turns out, and that's actually what people wanted. And so I think we've been talking to people across the country about both in one-on-one conversations and larger group conversations like this about that cocktail of things. And I think where we've seen this go awry is in places where the response has been to not engage. We have a better approach. We have a better plan. We have a plan to keep people safe, and we have a plan to invest in communities in doing so. That's a winning argument. We have to make it.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, like, I think one of the other things, like, my advice to other folks who, to your question is, we didn't allow Brandon, and Brandon didn't allow himself to be defined by, one slogan or one phrase that he said back in 2020, right? That his position on the issue of public safety was what we wanted to speak for his position on the issue of public safety. And we've said this since, but this question of Brandon saying there's this perception that this attack has some sort of mythical power. And I think one of the things that we feel coming out of this is defund has jumped the shark a little bit. It kind of reminds me of, as a climate person, I've seen a lot of polling on the Green New Deal, right? And so something Republicans love to say about the Green New Deal is it's going to end meat and it's going to end airplane travel and whatever. And if you look at the polling on that stuff, people don't buy it. People don't buy that Democrats are going to end meat. It just sounds ridiculous on its face. And I think we got defund to that place here, and I think it can be that. I think it can be this kind of boy who cried wolf kind of thing. Anytime someone says it, just because and this was the truth. Vallas didn't actually have any other argument.
And we're gonna wrap it up pretty soon. Just you being here, I remember your interview with Brandon when we were still running, and it was in Rainbow Push, and we were supposed to get a private room for the reporter and Brandon, Mayor Johnson, and instead, Reverend Jesse Jackson insisted on sitting in on it, and it was just one of those moments, though, where the way that Reverend Jackson wrapped his arms around Brandon, both figuratively and literally that day, stood up at his event. There was so much history behind Brandon's candidacy, and it's what Stacey was talking about with regards to ballot initiatives and Ward 6 and building that from the grassroots up. But it also was something that Jesse Jackson was working on decades and decades ago, and seeing that through line throughout the campaign. That was kind of what grounded a lot of us. It was just kind of okay, we know what we're trying to do here. We see the path, but we're pretty much out of time. Just the three of you, are there any parting thoughts, wisdom, gems that you want to leave folks with? Please say yes.
My only other thought is just, I think the big takeaway for me, the thing I've continued to say since the election, the thing I will say until I can't say it anymore, is just that voters are ready to have an adult conversation about these issues. It's not a binary choice between, if you see polling that says voters are concerned about crime, your two choices are not pro-police or anti-police, right? There's a way to articulate a comprehensive public safety message that, yes, includes policing, whatever, you gotta talk about it, but that there's a way to talk about the issue of comprehensive public safety and that voters will actually respond to that. And that is the thing that I think is the real kind of, I don't know if I want to call it an innovation, but something, I think we sort of stumbled on something here that works, and we really want to see that replicated, because I think we can replicate what happened here in Chicago.
Yeah, elections are about contrast. Draw the contrast, have a position, say it loudly, and then, we've seen, I think, over the last several years, it's been, we win these races, and then we sort of regress into the background and don't continue to have the fights, in the political fights. And these political fights are necessary to continue so that we win the next level of fight. So I think, the through line that Stacey has drawn for us in this is really important. And it's, it's a line. So there's a little arrow at the end of it that we learned in school, which means it keeps going. And I think it's just really important to continue to have these political fights, to continue to advocate, to continue to agitate, because if we don't, then the other side sort of becomes more emboldened, and we fall back into the same trap. So I think that's what's incumbent on us all to do now, not just here in Chicago, but in all across the country.
I think create the conditions and the capacity and the candidates that can create the space to usher in the equity and the justice that you need to experience and deserve in our world. These guys are able to convey that. They are confident that you can win with this because they have seen the conditions in which it works. And so it is I think the word is and. and we have to begin to live in the world. And because I actually think our survival in this moment depends on it. It's not a choice. It's a question of our commitment.
All right. That's all the time that we have. If you didn't get to ask your question, or if you come up with another one, I guarantee if you run into these three, they're more than happy to talk about how they help for. Oh, all right. I'll give myself a little bit. We are more than happy to talk about how we helped Mayor Brandon Johnson win his first election and how we plan to help him win his next. Oh, and because that line keeps going forward. So thank you all. We will see you all around.
Thanks.